Hello, good morning, everybody. Good morning again for those who are connecting again after the challenge lab that we just had. My name is Aurélie Salver, and I'm delighted to be with you today, facilitating this plenary session on preventing gender-based violence in times of crisis. We will have an hour and a half to discuss with our panelists and also with our virtual audience about this topic. I would like to welcome all of you and ask you to please participate and share your valuable ideas and comments to this interactive dialogue through our different platforms, Twitter and Instagram at UfM Secretariat, Twitter at CM, Facebook, UfM Secretariat, and you have our hashtag Women for Mediterranean. All along the session, we will also have an amazing graphic facilitator, Blanche Alice. We will show from time to time how she's recording the different conversations that we are having. So to introduce this topic, according to recent data, 243 million of girls and women aged 15 to 49 have been subjected to sexual and physical violence worldwide, perpetrated by an intimate partner in the previous 12 months. So we can see that this situation is increasing in every type of emergency, including epidemics. The Ebola pandemic demonstrated that multiple forms of violence were exacerbated within crisis contexts, including domestic violence, trafficking, child marriage, and sexual exploitation and abuse. Emerging data shows that since the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic that has deepened economic and social stress coupled with restricted movement, social isolation measures, and less access to community support, the violence against women and girls has surged in many countries, including some of the Union for the Mediterranean countries. Since the lockdown in countries like Tunisia, calls to a helpline in the first days of confinement increased fivefold. However, other countries have seen a decline in reports, suggesting that some women face barriers to reporting violence or seeking help. In addition, with a strained health system, access to vital sexual and reproductive health services, including for women subjected to violence, is likely becoming more limited. Other services such as hotlines, crisis centers, shelters, legal aid, and protection services may also be scaled back, further reducing access to the few sources of help that women in abusive relationships might have. This is worse for women who are displaced, refugees, and living in conflict-affected areas who are particularly vulnerable. Evidence from previous pandemics also reveals increased violence against female health workers, online violence, feminicide, harmful practices, and racial and ethnic discrimination. So government need to take urgent measures to support women and girls experiencing violence and ensure that quality services are provided as part of the pandemic response. So I would like to welcome the first speakers of our panel today. This is first Mrs. Janneke van der Graaf Kukler. She's the Deputy Regional Director for the Arab States for UN Women. And also I would like to welcome with us today Suad Sassi, who is responsible of the international cooperation and the exterior relations of the municipality of Tunis. Welcome to both of you. Before we start answering the first questions, I would like to have some interaction with the audience. And I would ask you to answer a poll. So if you're on the platform, you will see that there is at the bottom of the platform of the conference, there is a voting option. Right? If you don't see it, you can refresh your screen. This is available in the platform and in the app. And you can read the first question, which is, according to you, how many women and girls age 15 to 49 have been subjected to sexual and or physical violence perpetrated by an intimate partner in the previous 12 months. 86 million, 150 million, 243 million. I leave you 30 seconds to answer what you think is the right answer. Okay, let me know when we can start to see the results of the poll online. Thirty seconds. Okay. So let's see. Can we see them on the screen? Fantastic. So yes, we have the answers little by little that are appearing. So it's still not clear. This is the final voting. Okay, so we can see that there is still a lot of uncertainty, right, on this topic. So I will give you the answer after the interventions of the two first moderators. I will be opening today's discussion with Mrs. Janneke van der Graaf-Kukler and Mrs. Swadsasi with two main questions for them. So you will have no more than 10 minutes to answer, so we can give space and open the interactive dialogue with the audience. Again, to the audience, feel free to write your questions. We will have Kate who will tell us at the end of the sessions what are your questions, and feel free to use our hashtag Women for Mediterranean. So the questions are, what happened during the lockdown? Do you have a snapshot of the attitudes, the perceptions on violence in the region? And then what innovative solutions have been adopted to We're going to try. Janneke, do you want to go first?
Thank you so much for this, and thank you for this session, which I think is so important. Situation we're all in, but more generally. And it's really great to see also the use of technology and the thinking behind this session in terms of the panelists, which it's really great to be part of. And I wish to say hello, of course, also to my fellow panelists here today, and I'm very excited to hear from them as well. So in terms of your first question, what happened during the pandemic? I think you've mentioned a couple of things already in your introduction. We know that in moments of crisis, violence escalates. And from previous experiences, also in terms of some of the support we've been providing around the Ebola crisis, we know that in particular violence against the most vulnerable women escalates. And we know that violence against women is high, even in normal times. You already mentioned, that the high number of women that experience intimate partner violence. 37% of ever partnered women in this region, in the region I'm talking about is the Eastern Mediterranean region, which includes, of course, many of the countries under the UfM, have reported physical and sexual violence against them in their lifetime, which is a staggering amount of women in normal times. And there is also underreporting in that number. And the reasons for this high number vary, with the underlying causes and issues really deep-seated and deep-rooted discrimination and gender bias. And this also has effects on the systems that support women survivors of violence. The systems are based on patriarchy, which literally result in a normalization of violence against women with limited investments in support services and access to justice. And these underlying issues and causes, we know, as I said before, become more evident during epidemics and particularly also in the current pandemic, highlighting once again the inequalities that still exist between genders. We are seeing rises in all forms of violence, femicide, child marriage, trafficking was mentioned before, and of course, and violence in the household. And during the lockdown across the globe, we've seen cases of violence escalate, with tensions rising in economic insecurities, childcare burdens, escalating tensions among couples and within families in the household. And the lockdown has also caused service providers, civil society, the police, the legislature to be unable to continue providing those services so necessary to victims of survivors of violence. So on the one hand, we're seeing an increase in the number of victims and survivors of violence, yet the services have been challenged and have needed to see a change in the way that they approach the support to survivors of violence. In some cases, in the beginning of the pandemic, we saw services stop altogether, unfortunately, and funds also being diverted to immediate response issues. But also we've seen a change in this with, innovation, with online systems, with hotlines being established. So while at the beginning of the pandemic, it took a while for the systems to respond, I think the fairly well addressed, some of the immediate concerns that had been measured. So for UN Women, we were, of course, very interested to identify at the onset of the pandemic some of the specific issues that, pertain to violence against women within household at individual level, but also to those services that are available to survivors of violence, and seeing the changes and shifts, and particularly then being able to respond in an evidence-based to the needs on the ground. So we put emphasis on understanding these underlying causes of the surge in violence and explored perceptions of violence against women and the changing gender roles within the household through an online survey covering 9 countries, 6 of which are in the southern and eastern Mediterranean: Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, and Palestine. And on the other hand, in addition to the online service, we worked very closely with 220 civil society organizations to really understand the surge and the response mechanisms in place and the needs to support and change in this regard. And the importance of this is because we know that a lot of victims of violence, and particularly the most marginalized, would not have access to an online survey, but would have access and be able to be identified in terms of the support required through civil society organizations and other service providers. So we tackled it on both sides. Some of the key findings that we have to address the issues and guide policy and programming investments where most needed are really crucial for the moving forward, but also because we see the pandemic is no near to ending. In some countries, it's escalating. We're seeing changes and ups and downs in terms of the lockdown measures taking. So very important to really reflect and to continue to engage on some of these findings. So we saw a surge in different forms of violence, including online harassment, and the sense of feeling unsafe was noted by on average 1 in 5 women who responded to our survey. And they expressed a particular fear of being of domestic violence by a spouse or a family member. And in some countries, this was as high as 1 in 3 women expressing fear of domestic violence. This is a high number of women, of course. It must also be noted that our survey also looked at the dynamics between men and women. And men also expressed feeling unsafe in their homes and changing gender dynamics causing anxiety, which also, of course, needs to be better understood in response mechanisms moving forward. But more women reported feeling unsafe, and more women really felt that domestic violence was a cause of concern, not only for themselves, but also for their family members and in their environments. In terms of seeking help behavior, the reporting of violence remains low, and the data available remains low. With underreporting a key issue, that means it remains a challenge within the pandemic, but also outside of the pandemic. And the key issues here are really fear of reprisals by whoever's causing the violence, but also violence still, and particularly in the household and in domestic sphere, really being seen as a private matter. So there's a stigma attached to this as well. And in terms of the help-seeking behavior, the response also showed that there was, at the time of the survey, which was at the beginning of the pandemic, a level of service breakdown, a level of information that hadn't managed to reach the women in particular, and the women that in principle also were experiencing violence for the first time. So we also, on the survey, the online survey, noted that a lot of women went to the police and the justice system for immediate support. So very important to continue and to escalate and to support those systems to respond to the increase in number of violence victims and survivors. And of course, civil society play a key role. And here, I think the main point is that we're seeing that for civil society and women's organizations, often these are the ones that are the main support system for the most vulnerable, be it migrant women, refugees, women living with disabilities, the LGBTI community, who in many countries to continue to face additional stigma, and also might not be able to access those government institutions that have been established. So very important to continue to support women's organizations and direct service delivery at community level. In terms of your second question, I just wanted to speak a bit about some of the innovations that we have seen across the region. And of course, noting that, as I said before, that violence against women has gone hand in hand with a decrease of the available services initially, and the reach to survivors of violence. And we have seen that at the beginning and currently, the services provided have really taken on new approaches, flexibility, and creating avenues, online avenues, also for women to access services immediately, being it services that are access to psychosocial support, immediate access to police services, justice services, etc. So while there has been a significant uptick in the survivors of violence, the social sector has taken action in many countries, increasing hotlines availability and also linking these to other referral systems, such as immediate access to the police or immediate access to the health system, including through SMS systems, social media platforms, etc. Practical shelter services is also, which were also disrupted initially. We're seeing the establishment of temporary shelters, really to look at the impact and making sure that additional shelters are available to address the social distancing measures and rules that have been established. Of course, with hygiene kits, practices, and training of staff, so immediate response mechanisms are there. And the police has also adopted several innovative approaches, and the justice system, which I'm sure our fellow panelists will speak of in more detail. I see I'm running out of time, so I won't speak to the details of that.
Thank you very much, Annika.
Just my last point, if I may, I just would like to say that in our civil society assessment survey, one of the main challenges that we see is the financing of those organizations that support the most vulnerable communities, and I've mentioned who these are, and the sustainability of these organizations and the services they provide really is contingent on how we support them and including the funding that we provide. And we really need to emphasize that area of work to see how we're able to continue to support the upsurge and the most marginalized communities through these organizations. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I would like to remind all the coming speakers to really stick to 5 minutes. And I've got my phone here, so I'm gonna really make it happen because we really want to have time for the questions. So Suad Sassi from Tunisia, from the City Council of Tunis, what is the situation in Tunisia? Which innovative solutions? You have 5 minutes. Let's go.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, madame.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the Union for the Mediterranean for this beautiful occasion that allows us to talk about all these issues that have to do with women, especially the issue of violence that women are just suffering everywhere in the world. Well, in terms of the city of Tunis, the city of Tunis is an innovative city. Basically, in this Arab and Muslim environment. It's an innovative city because since 1956, we really have uphold the rights for women. And you know that the leader, Bourguiba, basically just really fostered these rights. So many times we heard people saying that women did not really were not worth this help. But you know, the Tunisian women have just demonstrated that they really are entitled to all these rights. Thanks to the mobilization of women, we could really have the vertical and horizontal equality, and this allowed the city of Tunis for the first time in its history to have a woman mayoress of the city. And this woman is very much aware of the gender issue, and that's why she wanted to make sure that the municipal council is the main expression of this will to have women leaders who are responsible at the level of the city council and also the different commissions, to listen more to women, to serve more women and of course young women in Tunis and in the rest of the world. We were and we are still in war against COVID-19, but you know that wars and battles, as you know, there are always men who are in the front and women who just make sure that society is just functioning well, the industry, the schools, the services. So in the history, we have always had a separation in the wars between the role of men and women. But women have always made sure that societies still function during the wars. And at the end of the war, men came back and they were always having the priority, whereas women were just relegated to a second plan. But this time, the situation is different. Women are mobilized and women are just fighting in the forefront against COVID-19. And that's why they are criticized. They're criticized because they are very active. So the mayoress of Tunis, the female members of the city council are criticized because they're mobilized and because they are just fighting at the forefront, of course. And, you know, I don't want to talk about
il y a toujours des tensions. Par rapport au Covid, concrètement, quelles sont les innovations qui ont été proposées à la mairie de Tunis? Il nous reste 2 minutes.
You still have 2 minutes. So the innovations, okay, so we had a green hotline that women could use 24 hours a day, 7 days, which is 1807. It's a free call, and the teams of the city of Tunis could go and find the women, the municipal police, all the help teams fighting against COVID-19. They would go and help women and try to find solutions to help them. There is a medical center that offers free of charge services for all medical specialties to women. So we have doctors who belong to the city council that offer free services to the population. We have a partnership that we have created with civil society, and I'm talking about an innovative experience with Beatty Association. So the municipality of Tunis just gave them a huge building. So basically they have a lot of experience. So they help women and they give them refuge until they are able just to go back to their normal life. And there is a very important project that basically, besides the fight against COVID-19, the mayoress just asked USAID $700,000 with Citizens Alliance. We are just reinforcing the role of women. We are just empowering women economically in order just to make sure that these women have confidence in themselves and in order to put an efficient strategy. So the women who live in the Medina in Tunis are free, are strong, totally independent economically and socially. And basically, there will be a project who will be carried out by women and for women in partnership with all the different stakeholders. So we are just associating UN Women, the Ministry of Women, the National Loans Agency.
Merci beaucoup,
I am very sorry. I just talked too much. Well, thank you so much. It's absolutely overwhelming to see that the city of Tunis has just put in place so many initiatives. Thank you so much for this information. And we are just going to go back to you with the questions from the audience. So basically, we have a response Excuse me, I'm going just to move on
so the answer
English.
Of the survey will be 243 million of women and girls aged 15 to 49 have been subjected to sexual and or physical violence perpetrated by an intimate partner in the previous 12 months. So it's huge. We will continue the discussion with the second part of our panel, and allow me to introduce new speakers. We have with you first Marcela Pirone, who is president of Women Against Violence Network Europe. And she's a feminist lawyer who has worked for over 30 years in Italy at international level to advocate for women's rights and especially women victims of violence. So we can see that at the moment, perhaps we can put it back. We had the illustration that has been done by Blanche Ellis. I don't know if the technicians can put it back while I'm speaking, because it's a very beautiful thing. Yes, exactly. And Blanche will go on working on this while we're talking in the plenary. I want to introduce Melza Ararat is PhD. She is the founding director of Corporate Governance Forum of Turkey at Sabancı University. She's currently a professor of management. She has a corporate background and who has held senior management and board positions in Benelux, Asia Pacific, and Japan before returning to academia. And then we have Lucie de Chiffre, who has been working in the humanitarian and development sector, mainly in South Asia and the Middle East. And she is programs manager at Euromed Feminist Initiative, a policy network that encompasses women's rights organizations from both sides of the Mediterranean and advocates for gender equality and women's rights as inseparable from democracy building and citizenship. Welcome to the three new panelists. We have three questions for you. So either you answer all of them or you pick one, because I know that in 5 minutes is very harsh. The three questions are, first, what role civil society organizations, women's rights organizations, policy platforms, initiatives play in addressing women violence against women in the Euro-Mediterranean region? Second question, what role does the private sector and organizations of workers and employers play in addressing violence against women in the Euro-Mediterranean region? And this question is especially for Melza, right, who has background in the corporate sector. And the last is, what actions are needed to raise awareness among community members and families about the increased risk of domestic partner violence during this pandemic? So in the order, I will ask first Marcela, then Melza, then Lucie, right? So if you're ready, feel free. I will again give you 5 minutes each. Let's listen to all of you. Thank you. Where I think you're still on mute. Do you think you can unmute yourself?
You can hear me now? Yes.
I can hear you, Marcela. Fantastic.
Sorry. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed for having me invited me for this conference. I'm very honored. I have already heard very interesting speeches, and I know and I enjoy being with such wonderful and interesting women. I am here with my experience, as has already been said, and representing the Italian shelters and the European network WAVE, which actually represents 152 women specialist services NGOs in 46 European countries. The role of women's society, civil society, has certainly been fundamental. If it had not been for women, feminist activists in the 70s, to speak up for all the women trapped in the secret private issue of male violence against them, we would not be where we are today. Women's society, civil society, has always asked for a common response to fight women against violence. It has asked to be aware and to take responsibility, the whole society. And now I'm going back to the 70s, because now I have the feeling that this is again the main task for women civil society. They are not only offering women concrete, professional and efficient support, like we have always done, and we will always do, managing incredibly also in this sudden crisis, as have already said, with no extra funds and very often at the edge of financial survival. But that is not only our only task. Women specialist services and women NGOs will have now more than before to recall what has been clearly already said with figures and described. It is a very, very difficult task at the moment, because violence against women and girls has actually never been really taken seriously and prioritized even pre this pandemic. So I'm afraid it will certainly not be prioritized in this upcoming current and future economic recession, which we know we will all face. So COVID crisis has been a great threat, and the consequences of it, the consequences on the gender inequality, which will unfortunately increase as everywhere, they will be very dangerous for violence against women and gender-based violence generally. We have also to think that what has already been happening before the crisis, with this radical right wave coming up politically. I think about Visegrad countries, but not only. We can think about some countries of the Mediterranean area, which see undemocratic regimes strengthening with this radical right, gaining more and more political power. And why I'm mentioning is because they have detrimental effects on human rights, especially on women's rights, which are never consolidated. I don't want to mention any of the countries because everyone has to consider its own country, but I can say from Italy how quickly that can go. We were experiencing this in a very short time. Luckily, it has finished now, this experience with populist Salvini. So the Women's NGO will continue being active and constantly vigilant on this issue, continue with passionate energy, and they will cooperate and ask for cooperation with all institutions and the policymakers. They ask for reciprocal recognition, and that means, as has already been said, stable funds, sufficient funds, so that we can tackle together this increasing problem. We say that the pandemic, the already existing pandemic of violence, which has always existed, has been shown more and come up more with the health pandemic. But we really can talk about issue as a pandemic. So what we are offering is really our competence.
Marcela, you have 30 seconds left.
We are offering really the competence, the passion, and the will to cooperate and to go on by tackling this with a really clear eye on the gender inequality. This is to be tackled with gender-sensitive policies, measures, and a great attention to whatever is the root of violence against women. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Marcela, for your fantastic input. Malza, what is your perspective from the corporate point of view? Could you share with us?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to speak on this important issue. Since we have only 5 minutes, I'll try to summarize what I'm going to say in the beginning with a few sentences. I will focus on the role of companies and business organizations in addressing intimate partner violence, and my intervention is based on our experience in Turkey and focused on educated white-collar workers, and frequently in management roles. So this is rather different than the most vulnerable women that we have been focused on, but this category of women are vulnerable in a different sense. So let me give you a little bit of background on Turkey. Turkey was the first country that signed the Istanbul Convention, and since then the government has taken many steps to protect women against intimate partner violence. But it's not easy. Transforming a patriarchal state to a gender-sensitive state is a long process. So none of the measures that are associated with public services have been trusted by women. So there comes the role for businesses. Of course, the state policies and support infrastructures helped the issue to become more visible as women started to demand state protection and support in the aftermath of the Istanbul Convention. But unfortunately, the femicide numbers did not go down, since violence against women is deeply rooted in prevailing social and ethical norms, gender stereotypes, and also gendered values. These norms are the outcome of a male-dominated patriarchal system woven into the fabric of the societal culture. They are difficult to change. On the other hand, organizations such as companies and other institutions have a culture of their own. These values are reflected in organizational policies, decisions, and the organizational behaviors, of course. And they have the potential to have an impact on the values and the behavior of employees, customers, suppliers. And they have a spillover effect on the society, and then they can be transformational. Of course, during the pandemic, we all know that the effects of the pandemic were unproportionally worse on women. And I'm not going to go into details of that, but just perhaps state the obvious that the first thing that businesses can do is to be aware of this unproportional effect on women. And in Turkey as well, the Global Compact Network, Turkish businessmen and industrialist associations, and Confederation of Businesses have brought the issue to the fore and organized panel discussions, etc. Our surveys in Turkey during the pandemic revealed an important fact. If the companies, if the organizations are supportive of gender equality and they have developed policies to protect their employees against domestic violence, then the employees, female employees, are better off compared to the control group of companies that do not have such policies. These policies were a result of a project called Business Against Domestic Violence, which was launched in 2015 by our university and the UN Population Fund and Turkish business associations. And the project aimed to support companies in developing policies that promote gender equality and freedom from violence as an organizational value. And during the past 6 years, more than 60 companies have joined the project. Thousands of men and women received gender equality trainings, and management teams received special training to recognize signs of abuse and deal with exposed women in the most supportive way. The companies that participated in the project have also established a platform to support each other and also help other companies to develop their own workplace policies. The common component of those policies was empowering women, giving them the confidence to deal with the situation and offer them a safe work environment on the basis of a shared value, that's gender equality. So our survey suggests that both companies and their employees have benefited from adoption of policies against domestic violence. Female employees find their work more meaningful, they trust their management more, they set higher ambitions for themselves, and that they are more likely to stay in the labor force and deal with the issues. Right. So during the pandemic, of course, all the incidences of domestic violence surged, but the surveys revealed that the percentage of women who have experienced violence and sought help has increased, but the effects on women employed by companies who had developed policies were much less severe than those employed by other companies. The percentage of
Melsa, I mean, do you still have, you have a few left seconds?
Yes, I have a few left seconds to conclude, because initially you were asked to prepare a 10-minute talk, so reducing 10 minutes to 5 minutes is not that easy.
It's hard, it's always a challenge.
And the last minute. And in the last minute, it's really difficult. So it appears that companies that are gender sensitized by developing policies have offered better support to their employees during the pandemic. And the percentage of female employees who have experienced physical violence is lower, and the employees are more confident that they will keep their jobs, and they have experienced lower levels of stress. So I conclude, the companies and employers can contribute to a more inclusive and egalitarian society by adopting and promoting workplace policies based on egalitarian values. By doing so, they develop organizational cultures that have a transformational impact on the society.
Thank you so much, Melsa, and I know it's always a challenge. Thank you so much for your very valuable contribution. Lucy, what is your perspective on these topics?
Good morning, all of you, your partners and colleagues. Thanks a lot for the invitation. We really value the initiative to involve CSOs and women rights organizations in this important conference. So we all know that the COVID-19 crisis has put a spotlight on structural inequalities that already existed between women and men and has increased violence. On the other hand, women, health workers, informal workers, caretakers are at the forefront of dealing with the consequences of the pandemic, but remain largely underrepresented in the response and recovery decision-making processes. So CSO's role has been multifold, both addressing the consequences of the crisis on women and girls, but also addressing structural inequalities. So first, in terms of service delivery and awareness raising, CSOs in the Mediterranean region have urgently stepped in the crisis response, ensuring continuity of care for sexual and reproductive health, including psychosocial services, providing services and referrals for women and girls victims, disseminating information about existing services, especially at community level, and conveying community-based risk communication. Also, women rights organizations have been providing invaluable source of data, taking into account the reality of oppression women are living, and also the different levels of access to resources and services. So we know that key findings on the gender impacts have been often incomplete. So CSOs have been providing gender disaggregated data on the impacts of COVID, and also supported the development of joint multisectoral gender analysis on COVID-19. They also play an important role in monitoring the level of implementation of regional and national action plans related to COVID-19 from a gender perspective. In terms of advocacy, with this evidence that women rights organizations have been gathering, we're calling for policy, legislative, and structural change. So, for instance, we've been calling for intersectional gender sensitivity in international aid to make sure that refugees, migrants, displaced women are included in the national response plan, and also promoting the women, peace and security agenda. We have been emphasizing the importance of democracy, peace and social justice as prerequisites for achieving gender equality in the COVID-19 response and recovery measures. Yet, today we still see there's no gender balance in decision-making bodies and no systematic gender lens in global COVID-19 decision-making. So our objective as the Euromed Feminist Initiative has been to continue providing our members with expanded space for advocacy. This means recognizing women as active agents of change, not only as victims or passive in the process, and on the other hand, considering women's participation in decision making as a basic principle, a right, a matter of democracy and social justice, not only as an issue of effectiveness or impact. Also, women rights organizations have long understood we need to put our expertise together. So one of the initiatives we've had collectively is to set up a regional civil society observatory to follow up on the implementation of key national and regional mechanisms on violence against women, peace and security. And once we organize as policy networks, we see we can have greater impact, also using and transforming existing channels of cooperation with national and regional stakeholders. So, for instance, for us, one of the very important instruments we've been using as a reference is the fourth Union for the Mediterranean Declaration on strengthening the role of women in society. And lately we've organized a regional policy dialogue in collaboration with the Ministry of Social Development in Jordan, and we brought together decision makers, legal and gender experts, researchers, women rights organizations, the EU and the UfM, and formulating recommendations to make sure, to update and follow up on the commitments on women rights.
Thank you, Lucy. A few more seconds if you want to add a last information.
Well, I wanted to go back to the question of the private sector. I was really interested in Melza's intervention. I wanted to add that the importance for the private sector to adopt zero tolerance policies against gender discrimination and harassment at the workplace. It's interesting also to see how women rights organizations can help in this process, providing gender analysis of the internal policies and support the training of workers' representatives on a gender perspective, which are really a factor for success. Also, another point about the private sector.
That's all I can, I can add for now. Thank you very much, Lucy.
Welcome.
Okay, thank you to our three speakers, Marcela, Melza, and Lucy. Thank you very much. And sorry if I had to shorten sometimes your intervention so that we have time for the last speakers of our third part of the panel. I would like to continue the discussion with our two last panelists. I will introduce you, but before I do so, I would like to propose to the audience a second poll. The poll question, you can find it at the bottom of your screen, as I was saying, on the app or on the platform of the event. You will refresh the screen, go to vote. Do you think we could have the poll question appearing? These ideas. Lockdowns are increasing the risk of violence against women and girls. By how much have cases of domestic violence increased in some countries? And the options are first by 10%, by 20%, by 30%. Hello? Yes. So we can see the poll appearing on the screen, and you have 30 seconds to answer this. So let's see.
Ja, hallo. Wir hören uns heute um 12, oder? Mit der
Oh, wait, somebody is speaking. I don't know who that is. Could you mute? Thank you. Okay, so we can see, yes, that the votes are almost over. We see a majority for 30%, and yes, that's the right answer. 30% have increased the risk of violence. So to talk about this in the final part of this panel, I would like to welcome Claudine Aoun-Roukos, who is the president of National Commission for Lebanese Women. She is the head of the Supreme Council of Arab Women Organization for the years 2019 to 2021. She was appointed as president of the National Commission for Lebanese Women in 2017, where she works on empowering Lebanese women, protecting their rights, and ensuring their effective participation in society. She's also an environmental activist, working on several important matters, including the protection of migratory birds, etc., etc. And the second speaker of this part of the panel, our last speaker, is Dr. Nino Berzulli, Director of the Division of Country Health Programs at WHO Regional Office for Europe. Dr. Nino Berzulli is a medical doctor and public health professional with over 16 years of experience working in health sector. She joined the WHO Europe in 2018 to lead the sexual and reproductive health program. So both of them will have two questions to talk about, and they can choose. One of them is how countries ensure the continuation of services, right? Hotlines, shelters, rape crisis centers, counseling for survivors during the crisis. And the second question, what have we learned from the previous pandemic, and are we ready for a second wave? Actually, we are in a second wave, so are we ready for a similar crisis? I will ask first Claudine to answer, and then Nino. The floor is yours.
Merci Aurélie. حضرات السيدات والسادة، لا شك أن الحج المنزلي الذي فرضته أزمة جائحة كوفيد-19 التي هزت العالم أعاد إلى الواجهة موضوع العنف ضد النساء والفتيات استزايد بشكل كبير في هذه الفترة. في لبنان رصدت قوى الأمن الداخلي من خلال عدد الاتصالات الواردة على الخط الساخن المخصص لها لتلقي شكاوى العنف الأسري ارتفاعاً ملحوظاً في نسبة جرائم العنف. واتجاه هذه الظاهرة التي حلت في ظروف اقتصادية فائقة الصعوبة والتي فاقمها الإقفال التام للمؤسسات والإدارات الرسمية والخاصة التي تقدم الخدمات لضحايا العنف، اتخذت الهيئة الوطنية لشؤون المرأة اللبنانية سلسلة إجراءات سريعة. أولى المبادرات كانت إطلاق حملة توعوية بالتعاون مع قوى الأمن الداخلي دعت من خلالها النساء اللواتي يتعرضن للعنف أو أي شاهد أو شاهدة إلى عدم التردد في الإبلاغ عنه عبر الاتصال بقوى الأمن الداخلي على الخط الساخن بهدف معالجة الشكاوى بأسرع الوقت الممكن. بعد ذلك طلبت الهيئة الوطنية ووافقت النيابة العامة التمييزية فتح شكاوى فورية للنساء اللواتي يتعرضن للعنف داخل أسرهن والاكتفاء بالاستماع إلى إفادتهن عبر الهاتف إذا لم يتمكن من الحضور إلى المفرزة القضائية المتخصصة بسبب الحجر المنزلي. وتم اعتماد هذه الآلية في تلقي شكاوى من قبل القضاة وصدرت قرارات عدة لحماية الضحايا وأولادهم عبر التقنيات الافتراضية. وأجرت الهيئة الوطنية دراسة حول أشكال العنف ضد النساء والفتيات من حيث طبيعة هذا العنف ووتيرة وقوعه والموقع الجغرافي لحصوله خلال فترة التعبئة العامة. كما عقدت اجتماعا موسعا مع جمعيات ومنظمات المجتمع المدني لمشاركة وزارة الشؤون الاجتماعية، واستعرضت التحديات التي تواجهها تلك المنظمات في مجال تأمين الحماية للنساء من العنف الأسري، ونسقت ما بين الجمعيات وبين المؤسسات الحكومية بهدف مواجهة التحديات التي فرضتها الأزمة الصحية وتقديم الخدمات اللازمة لضحايا العنف من خدمات طبية وقانونية واستشارية والاستفادة من ملاجئ الإيواء. وفي ظل ارتفاع عدد شكاوى جرائم الابتزاز والتحرش الجنسي عبر الإنترنت خلال فترة التعبئة العامة، أطلقت الهيئة الوطنية حملة طلبت من خلالها من المواطنات والمواطنين الاتصال بقوى الأمن الداخلي على خط ساخن خاص بهذه الجرائم في حال تعرضهم للابتزاز والتحرش الجنسي عبر مواقع التواصل الاجتماعي، وذكرت بمعاقبة القانون لهذه الجرائم. ومن أبرز ما أسعت الهيئة الوطنية إلى تحقيقه التواصل مع النواب لحثهم على التسريع في مسار تعديل قانون حماية النساء وسائر الأفراد أسر من العنف الأسري في مجلس النيابي لتأمين حماية أكبر للضحية ولأولادها، والتسريع في إقرار قانون تجريم التحرش الجنسي وحماية ضحاياه. كما عقدت الهيئة واللجنة الدولية للحقوقيين International Commission of Jurists ندوة حول قواعد الإثبات والممارسات الموصى بها في حالات العنف الجنسي والعنف المبني على النوع الاجتماعي في لبنان، وهدفت إلى تحديد الثغرات وسبل معالجة مواطن القصور الموجودة في الإطار الإجرائي اللبناني والممارسات المتعلقة بالأدلة في قضايا العنف الجنسي والعنف المبني على النوع الاجتماعي ومناقشتها واستطلاعها، وهي حاليا تسعى لتنفيذ التوصيات التي خلصت إليها المناقشات في الندوة. وتأتي هذه المبادرات كلها لتندرج أيضا في إطار تنفيذ لبنان لخطة العمل الوطنية لتطبيق قرار مجلس الأمن 1325 حول المرأة والسلام والأمن، ومن أحد محاورها الرئيسية مكافحة العنف المبني على النوع الاجتماعي. وقد باشرنا بمسح وتقييم الملاجئ لإيواء ضحايا العنف الأسري وبالعمل لاعتماد تعريفات موحدة لأنواع العنف. لابد أن أشير إلى أننا تعرضنا هذا العام إلى أبشع أنواع العنف، من الأزمة الاقتصادية الضاغطة إلى أزمة جائحة كوفيد-19 وانفجار مرفأ بيروت المأساوي. تخيلوا وقع هذه الأزمات على مجتمعنا ككل وانعكاساتها على النساء والفتيات خصوصا، هذه الفئة التي تتأثر عادة بتداعيات الكوارث والشدائد بشكل أكبر. Je crois que le temps est fini. Ça fait 5 minutes. Je vais m'arrêter ici.
Coupling and marrying crises. I stop at this point. Thank you.
Do you want to conclude this panel with your intervention, and then we'll go to the questions of the audience?
Thank you so much. And it's a great pleasure for me to be part of these discussions. Exactly 2 weeks after I joined UfM WHO project on strengthening public health approaches towards eliminating violence against women was endorsed by the UfM senior officials meeting. And we are very excited. This project will bring together all countries from all around the Mediterranean and beyond for knowledge exchange and for building capacities in preventing and responding violence against women as a key public health, gender equality and development issue. I'm participating here today on behalf of WHO and will speak for all parts of the organization that works with UfM member states, and we are extremely happy to join forces on this very important topic. Going back to your question, which relates on how countries have ensured the continuation of the services for survivors during the countries. COVID-19 blindly revealed the weaknesses of the health systems, but there are also very important lessons learned and the initiatives that the countries have taken forward. Some at the pilot stage, but it's very important that they are taken at scale. Since the start of the pandemic, WHO has raised the attention on the connections between the pandemic and the violence against women. We have published the guidance outlining what governments and the health services can do so that the violence survivors can safely access help and healthcare in the context of COVID-19. We have also issued the recommendations on when data need to be collected and how they can be collected, keeping in mind, of course, the important aspect, the safety of women. We have also, WHO also has conducted the rapid assessments on what impact the pandemic has had on violence against women and what measures countries have taken to respond. And through this research, we have documented how countries have tried to ensure the continuation of services for survivors. And the majority of countries, as I have already mentioned, have taken one or the several measures. If we bring some of the examples of these measures, the provision of additional funding to assist the violence against women services so that they can adapt to the new COVID-19 requirements, anticipating rises in demand was one of them. However, in many countries, this funding was still not enough to cope with increased demand and was often tied to specific type of the services or service provision, such as technological solutions or the shelter expansions. Countries also have invested in expansion and the maintenance of the shelters and the helpline, as already have been mentioned by other speakers, as these were the services that faced the increased demand. This included the establishment of temporary shelters in collaborations with hotels, and this is and Airbnb in the Booking.com, and this is a very good example of the public-private partnerships. Providing the PPE shelters, for staff, equipment, existing shelters to accommodate the quarantine requirements and the new regulations. Some countries also have established the pop-up consultation centers in supermarkets or encourage the use of the code words, the mask 19 code words, for instance, using pharmacists as an entry point for support services. We also learned the need, during this pandemic, we also learned the need to harness the digital services. And we've heard from some speakers also that country increasingly turn to the digital solutions to ensure the better access to services. Measures to maintain and in some cases expand the helpline availability for survivors has been seen in many countries with methods varying, of course, from from the introduction of new helpline numbers using text messaging or different chat services such as WhatsApp, or new apps with one-tap alert system that directly access the national SOS helplines. Several countries have also moved resources such as psychosocial support and counseling online, practicing remote case management through email or video conferencing. All in all, there are a number of examples, very interesting initiatives that have been implemented by the countries during this pandemic. But of course, it's very important to take them.
So much. Dr. Berzuli, a few seconds left for your intervention.
In some, as I already mentioned, the governments have taken a number of measures to maintain and expand the violence against women service provision during pandemic. And I would also like to emphasize that in several countries, also the NGO-led measures were very important to fill the gaps in government-led responses and to mitigate the negative impact of the COVID-19 responses. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, really, to both of you for your interventions. We will collect the questions from the audience. Kate, do we have anything? And feel free as well to show us the beautiful work of Blanche if it's around here. So Kate, what is the audience asking?
Good morning, Aurélie. So we have 5 questions from the audience. They are directed to any of the speakers. The first question is, online harassment has increased during the pandemic, especially among young people. How can we work with adolescent girls and boys to prevent this type of violence? The next question is, there have been a lot of initiatives set up by civil society organizations providing shelters, services and protection for women who are victims of violence, such as the AFTED initiative in Tunisia in cooperation with the national government there. To what extent should coordination between public authorities and civil society organizations be reinforced? Our third question is about data. Data is a crucial tool for understanding how and why crisis can lead to an increase in violence against women and girls. But this pandemic may make it difficult to collect data. How can we ensure effective and safe data collection on gender-based violence during lockdowns? The penultimate question is, what preventative policies can UfM member states adopt to counter the rise of violence during crisis situations? And our final question is about language. We talk a lot about violence against women and about women perhaps in a passive sense. A woman was attacked. We don't seem to talk so much about the perpetrators. So our question is there a need to focus more on perpetrators and to work with them? And are there any initiatives that are doing this? Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kate. Okay, so we will allocate 5 minutes to answer these 5 questions. So I don't think we'll take them all, honestly. I would like to start with the last one. The language. Who is interested in answering this? Feel free to raise your hand, and I will. You can have your. Yes. Anybody is interested on this idea of working with the perpetrators? Because it's true, we always talk about women and girls, but somebody is perpetrating violence. I know that in Lebanon, for example, Abad is working a lot with men. And their access of violence, of rage, and counseling them psychologically and training them on gender stereotypes. Do you know about any other initiatives? Anybody wants to intervene on this? Yes, Swat? Go for it. In French. And if you want,
merci beaucoup.
Swat,
Merci beaucoup.
Swat, en bas, tu cliques en bas sur la map.
Underneath, if you click on the button.
Attends, je vais expliquer en français.
I'm going to explain it.
I'm going to explain in French. So Swad, tu cliques sur la map monde en bas à droite.
You have to click on the button that shows a world map.
Okay.
Madame Swad cannot find it, but anyway. Well, basically, I want to talk about an issue that belongs to the strategy for the city of Tunis. Is just work on education. So basically we just try to work with the perpetrators, to listen to them, to understand the reasons and to help them psychologically. But the basic work that we're just carrying out is in the schools, middle schools, high schools. So basically we're just working with the Ministry of Education, and we're working with different civil society association in order just to organize civic trainings for young people, for boys. Yes, boys and girls, because the boys, they do violence when they become men, because there's a mother who follows stereotypes, and this mother just followed traditions. The mother just gave a lot of taboos to their sons. So basically you're talking about initiatives for boys. But because I mean we have just so many things to talk about women responsibility. Yeah, so we try as soon as we can to just carry out an educational work in order to make sure that these young people are just mature, that respect the others, respect diversity, and in order to allow them to express themselves in a civic way.
Yes, sorry. I just wanted to answer not to this particular question, but to the question about what can be done with governments and things. I think the Istanbul Convention is a very, very good example what can be done in a strict, strong cooperation between institutions, governments, policymakers, and civil society. It gives a very integrated, holistic model which approaches domestic violence and violence against women and girls from all points of view, with all this prevention character, with this protection, prosecution, and policymaking. So I think this is a very, very good approach, which we should look at for future policies in all countries.
Thank you, Marcela. Thank you so much. Janneke, what did you want to say?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think, this all goes back to the underlying issue and the causes and the deep-rooted discrimination that exists against women in many countries, and the need to tackle the issue really based on what we know are these social norms and gender dynamics that we need to address. And part of that is, of course, in terms of engaging youth, engaging men and boys, and understanding masculinities and the dynamics in the household. So what we as UN Women support, particularly, of course, in the MENA region, is looking at identifying the issues that men and boys are dealing with and their understanding of gender dynamics through research, but also translating that research into very concrete action at civil society, at the community level through civil society organizations, so that research actually starts influencing behavior change on the ground. So engaging men and boys is, of course, crucial. Engaging adolescents and youth is crucial, girls and boys in schools, through youth networks that are online, and there are quite a few that we can actually consolidate and come together with concrete messaging as well. And through the universities and working with university students within specific programs on gender, but also mainstreaming gender into different courses.
Thank you.
So I think those are very practical approaches that can be taken. Thanks, Aurélie.
Thank you, Janneke. And our last answer from Lucie.
I wanted to talk about the online harassment. So, same, we really need to have the proactive engagement of men and boys. And I totally agree with the recommendations about education. We also need to have a stronger, to really work with the media on deconstructing stereotypes and giving positive gender roles with the media. And also on online harassment, there's a big issue with the legislation that needs to be worked on.
Thank you very much. I can see that, yes, Nino wants to intervene very briefly.
Very briefly, with regard to the data, because there was, I think, the question about the data and the data collection, and the WHO has a clear guidance, on that we need to be very clear about the objectives and the rationale for the data collection and the way the risk of harm against the anticipated benefit, and we need to we don't need to prioritize the data collection over the women's safety. If the data collection exercise cannot ensure the privacy and the confidentiality of the women, if the referral of women to support services if needed is not possible, or if it puts women to a greater risk of harm or the distress, we really need to think about how we collect data, what mechanisms we will use, and what type of the data we collect.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Berzulli. Okay, so I will invite our speakers for a final statement. At the bottom of your screen, en bas de votre écran à droite, il y a une petite map monde qui dit interprétation. It says interpretation.
Well,
click on it. And that will help for the translation. There is no Arabic, Claudine? No? Okay. So we'll find out. Okay, so we will go in the order that we said before. One statement, one phrase. Let's go. Janneke, and we'll go in the same order as the panel. Bam.
Thank you so much. So the one phrase, really, I think we know what the issues are. I think we know that we need to improve and continue to strengthen data, our outreach to the most vulnerable, the financing and the funding, particularly also to civil society organizations, and our collective partnerships to really address the concerns at hand. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Janneke. Suad.
Thank you. What I have to say is we need to resist, all of us. We need to resist. Another thing, when we are in power, we need to be women in power, not men wearing women clothes. Yeah. We can always think about what does it mean to be a woman. But anyway, this would be the issue for another panel. And now, Marcela.
So, thinking about everyone who wants to help, I can only say that the best way to help is be aware, increase your knowledge about violence against women and domestic violence, avoid prejudices or wrong convictions, inform with right narrative, inform about existing professional help, spread leaflets, clear information so that women arrive with their time, their decision, their will to women's specialist services who will support their own decision and way to escape from violence against women, their own situation. Otherwise, we risk to put them in more danger. So if you want to help, please do it. And there are, by informing and directing to the specialist services and to professions. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcela. Melza.
Thank
you. Businesses and employers' involvement is absolutely necessary to fight against domestic violence. Companies can protect and empower their female employees and the intimate partners of their male employees by adopting policies and creating a culture of equality and no tolerance to violence.
Thank you so much, Melza. Lucy, what is your final statement?
Well, thank you very much. I would really like to insist on the importance to take into account civil society organization in their diversity, their analysis, the data they are collecting, and also to stress the need for affirmative measures to increase the representation of women so they participate actively in the crisis response governance and to ensure there's a gender perspective in all decisions taken in crisis response and recovery. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you, Lucy. Claudine.
Women's rights will not weaken our willpower. We are capable of achieving gender equality. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And finally, Nino.
Thank you. Access to people-centered health services, that also includes the services for women victims of the violence, is a human right and a prerequisite for an effective response to current pandemic and the future pandemics. And the governments will need to make sure that any restrictions and the lockdown measures do not negatively impact women, violence against women survivors, and restrict their access to services. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, could we see the fantastic work of Blanche to summarize this session? Yes, beautiful. Okay, so I would really like to thank all the speakers who have been with us today and who have dedicated their time and their fantastic insights. Janneke, Suad, Marcella, Melza, Lucy, Claudine, and Nino. Thank you so much. We have another panel coming, and we have a side event on agri-food sector at 2 p.m. How to incorporate the gender perspective in the agroalimentary and rural zones recuperation responses. So if you want to join, feel free. Thank you, all of you, for joining, and I hope you will enjoy the rest of the conference. Bye-bye. Have a great day.